I want to welcome all of you to today's session on optimizing results through effective vendor scorecarding. My name is Michael Levison, and I'm the CEO of Resolvion. For those of you that are not familiar with us, we're one of the leading repossession management and skip tracing companies in the country. We provide forwarding services, both early stage and late stage skip to repo services, LPR management, and we also have a division that specializes in the recovery of heavy equipment. We're not the largest company in the marketplace, but we're a pretty good size. We currently handle about 40,000 new repossession cases each month, and recover almost 10,000 cars every month. So that is going to be the extent of the ALS Resolvion commercial today. Our real focus for today is going to be on vendor scorecarding techniques. With a lot of lenders, these scorecards really drive the relationship and determine market share with the vendors. And I can tell you that a good scorecard and its proper use can really impact performance. Just speaking as a vendor, really nothing gets our attention more than a transparent, well-constructed scorecard that is used to reward and to penalize our performance. It really impacts how we resource and manage the business. We receive a lot of these scorecards every month, and and every single one of them is different. Some are very basic that look really mostly at just recovery rate, and I would say historically most have focused on repossession related performance, whether it be recovery rate, days to repo, overall resolution rate, that type of thing. But we are seeing a very clear trend towards including various compliance components in the scores and the scorecarding as well. And so this session is really designed to provide you insight into the different approaches used by different lenders. We're going to cover both repossession related performance as well as compliance related performance measures. And we're going to show you a series of examples ranging from simple to intermediate to advanced complexity, so you can get a feel for the range of approaches being used. My colleague Ronald Eubanks is going to lead the presentation today. Ronald is our SVP of front office operations at ALS Resolvion, and really he oversees all the work that's done prior to repossession, which in our case is 150 or so people that work these cases before the recovery takes place. So he really has the primary responsibility for understanding each client's scorecard and really ensuring that that our organization is performing at the top of them. So he lives and breathes these scorecards day in and day out. So as I said, he's going to take you through a number of examples covering both performance and compliance, but at the end, he's going to sort of tie it all together and marry it to an overview of what we have found to be a best practice among leading lenders for assignment and performance management. In other words, how to actually use these scorecards and marry it to strategy for optimizing results. But before I turn it over to him, just a few additional comments, housekeeping items. We do want this session to be as interactive as possible. So to facilitate that, we do encourage you to ask questions. There's a little box for typing in a question on your control panel, and we'll stop at 2 or 3 points throughout the presentation to answer those questions. If your control panel is not visible, by the way, you should see a little orange arrow that you can click on, and it'll expand it open. We're also going to do a few different polls throughout today's session, just to provide quick answers and feedback, and we'll share the results as we go. And I'm gonna start with that right now. just by asking the simple question, do you currently scorecard your vendor performance? So if you should see that on your screen. If you wouldn't mind just providing a quick answer to the question, and I'll close it out shortly and share the responses. Okay, so you can see of the people that are participating today, 62% are currently scorecarding their vendors, and 38% are not. This was sort of fun. Let me do one more of these. Let's see. So the question is, how often do you publish the scorecards? Monthly, quarterly, or something other? Give it a few more seconds here. Okay, you can see the split there. The majority on a monthly basis, 10% do it quarterly, and then the rest probably just on mostly a random periodic basis. All right, with that, I'm going to turn things over to Ronald Eubanks. Ronald, take it away.
All right, thank you, Mike, and thank you everyone for joining us today on our webinar on optimizing repossession results through effective vendor scorecarding. Now, from where we sit in the industry, we've been exposed to virtually every type of scorecard model. Now, there are some that solely measure recovery performance and some that focus primarily on regulatory and SOW compliance. Now, today I will show you different examples of some of the different methods that we've been exposed to. And at the end of it all, we will discuss our view on a vendor management best practice model. Now, the first section we will review consists of repo recovery performance examples. Now, this section consists of scorecards that place the majority, if not all, of their focus on the recovery results. Now, I'm going to take you through a few that differ in level of detail from basic to more complex in method. Now, the first scorecard that we will review is a recovery performance scorecard that is basic by design. Now, although simple, it is effective. This particular scorecard would be useful in a portfolio that focuses primarily on how many cars your vendor is recovering and how fast they're doing so. Now, this lender measures recovery rates by closed batches, not repos divided by total assignments. As you can see, there are no open or active assignments currently on this scorecard. Now, this is a very reliable method of measuring recovery results because it allows you to compare what was ultimately produced, whereas measuring too early will often show results differently because the batches have not completed their life cycle. Pulling your data too early will often provide an incomplete read because the batches that you're viewing is still a moving target. The only way to get a true result is to pull the recovery results from batches that have completed. Now, another key item that I want to point out on this scorecard is that this lender incorporates dates to repo on the scorecard, but it does not have an impact on the overall performance score. They also leave their assignments with each vendor for 21 days. Tiering is important when you're using this scorecard model to measure performance because you're pulling stats on completed batch assignments. Now, this lender has opted not to provide details on the other vendors. Instead, they compare us to a combined average of the recovery results produced by others. And lastly, this lender does not allocate or award market share based on performance. But if performance falls below norm, an action plan is required and market share loss is likely if there's no improvement. Okay, so just a quick recap on the basic scorecard that we just viewed. This is a closed batch measurement. This lender does not identify other vendors, but they compare us to a cumulative average. Days to repo is tracked, but it has no impact on the performance score. And this lender does not award market share based on performance. Now, the next scorecard that we will review is an intermediate scorecard design. Now, this lender places its focus solely on performance results. Now, what makes it different from this particular scorecard different from the one that we just viewed is the level of detail. This lender does identify all vendors that are being compared. They separate their assignments by assignment type, which would be voluntary or involuntary. Now, separating your voluntary assignments from your full service assignments is a good practice because they could potentially distort actual recovery results. Not only do they separate the assignments, but they also weight them separately, and those weightings generate an overall performance score. Now, unlike the last scorecard, days to repo does have an impact. It is measured, and that measurement has a 10% weighting on the overall performance score. Another unique detail about this scorecard is that it defines how market share is determined and allocated. Using a market share allocation based on performance is important. Simply put, it rewards consistently good performance with more business. You can also see that this lender has developed a point system that uses a 90-day cumulative score to determine who's earned the majority of their assignment flow. One more interesting component to this scorecard that I would like to share is the fact that this lender measures each vendor by percent to best. Now, as you can see, each vendor knows where they stand relative to the best performer, and that is something that changes monthly. So just a quick recap on our intermediate scorecard. This lender does identify all vendors that are being measured. They separate assignments by assignment type, which would be voluntary or involuntary. Days to repo is included and has a weighting on the overall performance score. This lender does utilize a performance-based market share allocation, and they measure each vendor by percent to best. Now, the next scorecard we'll review is a more complex performance-based scorecard. This one has several unique details about it. First, this lender bases the recovery percentage on total assignment inventory divided by recoveries. Now, this would give you a recovery percentage to measure, but it really does not give you a true view of how your vendors are actually performing on your monthly batches. Now, this lender uses 3 different components to determine an overall performance score, which they rate each vendor on. Now, these are shown here with the red arrows. First, we have recoveries, which is separated by assignment type, which would be involuntary or voluntary, and placement tier. This has a weighting of 30%. Second, positive closes. Now, this indicates to us that the lender understands that agent activity does in fact have an impact on customer payments. They have incorporated this in the performance scoring rather than penalizing their vendors for positive closes over recoveries. And not only is it incorporated, but it has a weighting of 50%. And third, days to repo. Now, we viewed a scorecard earlier that tracked days to repo, but it did not have an impact on the performance score. We viewed one that it did, and this one does as well. It is tracked, measured, compared, and it has a weighting of 20%. Now, all of these components combined give the lender a good idea of how their vendors are servicing their portfolio. Now, one more interesting detail about this scorecard that I want to point out is that this lender tracks recoveries by state. Now, this information can be used by a vendor to identify and fill coverage gaps or address their underperforming field recovery agents. Now, this will be helpful for a lender that wants to determine how market share is allocated by state. This tracking appears to be gaining in popularity because we have seen it on multiple scorecards across the industry. And just a quick recap on that one. This lender does not identify the vendors that are being compared. They measure performance on total assignments divided by recoveries. Recoveries, positive closes, and days to repo all have an impact on the overall performance score. And this lender has decided to track and measure recoveries by state. All right, and the last performance-based scorecard that we'll take a look at, this one is a closed batch performance scorecard that measures recoveries by a rolling 90-day basis. Now, this means that each month, this lender is looking at the last 3 months of closed batches. They report performance on 90 days back because they feel that this gives them the best measurement for their vendors' performance. Now, by looking at performance on a 90-day basis, it levels out any aberrations. If you have a vendor that is performing unusually well or unusually poorly 1 month, that's going to level out within the 90 days. Again, this is the best method of measuring performance because it provides a true result from batches that are completed. And just a quick recap on that one. Closed batch performance is measured. The lender has decided to use a rolling 90-day measurement, and each month this lender is looking at the last 3 months of closed batches.
Maybe a good time to take a quick break and a poll. If anybody has any questions, again, please submit them, and we will attempt to answer them. I'm going to launch another poll here on how you, those of you that do scorecard, how you currently measure recovery rate. Hopefully that's visible to you right now. If you wouldn't mind taking a few seconds to answer it, we'll share the results. Okay. Oops, I just closed it. There we go. So over half of the group is measuring recovery rate based on just total assignments, recoveries divided by total assignments. Only about 13% on discrete monthly batches, and then about a third using some other methodology. Interesting. I would say that the majority of our clients where we're getting scorecards, they are using monthly batches. Not in all cases, but in many cases, because that does give the best indicator of overall performance. You know, sort of where the vendor ended up. Whereas if you're measuring on that includes batches that are still open, you're not really seeing the end result. It can be even further skewed by the timing of when assignments were more recently placed. Ronald, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, thank you, Mike. Okay, everyone. The next section that we will review are the different methodologies in SOW and regulatory metrics. Now, this is high on everyone's radar, and several lenders measure and distribute those measurements monthly. Now, here's a scorecard that separates compliance into two sections: regulatory compliance requirements and call monitoring. First, let's go through the regulatory portion of the scorecard. Now, as you can see, repossession and error is listed here, which is no surprise because it is an industry-wide concern. Now, there is something that is interesting. The state-specific requirements component has the same scorecard weighting at 25%. Now, this is because if the state requirements are not followed, a lender could lose the ability to collect on their deficiency balance. Now, this lender's view is that following the state-specific requirements has the same importance as repossession and error. Next, we have personal property letter. Some states require that a personal property letter is sent to the customer detailing what was removed from the vehicle after repossession. This component has a 20% weighting. Next, with a 10% weighting each, there's late reporting, reporting the repossession within the time frame specified in the SLA, and account closures. As the lender closes assignments, are we accepting those notifications timely? There's also call monitoring, which I will go over into more detail on in a moment, but that has a 10% weighting. Now, all of these components combined are calculated to give a monthly performance score, which is identified here to the right with the purple arrow. And at the top, we have a goal, 3 months of scoring, and a 90-day average. Now on to the call monitoring section. Now, this is a lender that allows phone calls to their customers, but this is something that is heavily monitored. When measuring QA or call monitoring, it is important to set clear expectations. this lender has. They are very specific on what they're looking for on their calls. Was the QC disclosure used? Were the verifications used? Did their vendor disclose purpose? Was accurate information provided? Was the account documented? And last but definitely not least, was the vendor professional? Did they use harassing or threatening language during the course of the call? Now again, when measuring QA and or call monitoring, it is important to determine what is important to your institution and set those clear expectations. So just a quick recap on that scorecard. This lender separates compliance into two sections, which are regulatory compliance requirements and call monitoring. This lender's view is that following the state-specific requirements have the same importance as repossession and error. And several SOW and regulatory compliance components are scored and calculated to give an overall performance score. Now moving on to our next scorecard, this lender compares vendors' performance as it relates to agent activity on regulatory issues. There are three sections on this scorecard. First, at the top, we have a vendor comparison. This shows incidents by month from each vendor and overall totals. Now this section in the middle provides details on each one. Now we do not see this level of specificity on any other scorecard. This section highlights if there were complaints from the customers and how many. Now this lender is asking very important questions. Agent-related complaint. During the repossession process, did the recovery agent do anything to generate a customer complaint? Now, this could be the use of unprofessional language or unprofessional behavior during the course of the repossession. Fees. Did the recovery agent charge the customer unauthorized fees? Now, this lender does not allow the recovery agent to charge any personal property, storage, or redemption fees directly to the customer. If the customer notifies the lender that they were charged, that occurrence will be listed here. Personal property. Did the customer claim that they are missing or have damaged personal property? Vehicle damage. Is the customer claiming that the vehicle was damaged during the repossession or while the vehicle was in the agent's custody? Property damage. Did the agent cause damage to the customer's property, which could be their house, lawn, etc., during the course of the repossession? And repossession in error. Was this a valid repossession? Did the agent have an open and active repossession order for the vehicle? And this last section provides more detail on repossessions in error. Here it is separated by occurrence, by vendor, by month, and overall totals year to date. Now this is such a big deal to this lender that even though it is covered above, they've chosen to break it out even further to show how their vendors compare to each other as it relates to repossessions in error. All right, and just a quick recap on that section. This lender compares vendors' performance as it relates to agents' activity and regulatory issues. This scorecard identifies if there were complaints from the customer and how many, and repossessions in error are tracked and a vendor comparison is included on the scorecard. Now, in reviewing the next scorecard, we're looking at service standards more than compliance standards. Here is an example of a lender that has spelled out in contract what is important to their institution and built a scorecard around it. Now, it is separated into two sections, critical and non-critical. Now, if you ask 5 lenders what is critical to their institution, you will receive 5 different answers. Now, this lender is clear on what's critical to them. They do not compare us to any other vendors on the scorecard because it's irrelevant. Now, what is relevant is what the contract states, and are we meeting those expectations? They have set a goal for each metric and track our performance against that goal. And their critical metrics include invoicing. Are we invoicing them within the specified time frame? Invoice accuracy. Are the invoices without error? Repossession report. Are the repossessions notifications reported in less than 48 hours? Now, this lender's view is that invoicing is a critical item. But again, if you ask any other lender, their view is that it's not critical at all. Next, we're going to take a look into their non-critical items. Now, these are less critical to the lender, but are still important. Assignment acceptance, repossession updates. Now, these will be the updates that are provided by the field recovery agents. impound updates. The lender has a 48-hour requirement for each update. So they have set a different expectation for involuntary assignments and impound assignments as it relates to updates. Skip update will be next, and this lender has a requirement set at 14 days. And lastly, condition reports. Now, this will be technically a both critical and non-critical item. This is a part of the recovery agent reporting the repossession within the desired 48-hour time frame. Now, again, there's a clear goal set for these expectations. They are tracked. Our performance is measured against them. And we'll move on to our recap. Now, this scorecard is divided into two sections, critical and non-critical. They do not compare us to any other vendors on the scorecard, and they have set a goal for each metric, and our performance is tracked against that goal. All right, now we just...
All right, let's do one more poll before.
Okay.
I'm going to launch another poll here on just to get a feel for who's incorporating regulatory compliance into their current scorecards. Wouldn't mind taking a second or two to give us an answer. Okay, close it out and share it with you. So, looks like a little less than 30% do, a little less than 30% don't, and then the rest is not applicable because they don't scorecard. Okay, thank you. Ronald, please proceed.
Thank you, sir. All right, we just viewed a few scorecards. Now let's talk about how to couple those scorecards with strategy. Part of the equation is measuring your vendor's performance, but the other part is what strategy are you using to optimize that performance? Now, I deal with different lenders and expectations every day, and I can tell you firsthand that these scorecards have an impact on our behavior. Now, I'm going to go through what we think to be the best practice for performance management. We've been exposed to several and have taken bits and pieces from them all. And from our experience, it has the following components. Multiple vendors. Now, nothing drives performance like a competitive environment. It is best practice to have multiple vendors working your portfolio. This gives you the ability to rotate the assignments by using a tier strategy, but it's important that you do not exceed your assignment volume limitations. This strategy is only effective if you give your vendors enough assignments to dedicate resources. You want to avoid sending your vendors a small number of assignments because they may not receive the attention they require and could potentially end up mixed with other small portfolios. Fairly short assignment duration. It is best practice to keep forwarding assignments with a vendor for no more than 30 days and skip assignments no more than 60. Now, we've seen that if you leave assignments with a vendor for an extended period of time, it could have a negative impact on performance. We have noticed a trend that indicates after a certain time frame, results diminish. All interests are best served when the assignments are rotated. Closed batch measurement. Now, measuring recovery results by closed batches, whether 30, 60, or 90 days, really depends on the placement level, will give you the best read on how your vendors are actually performing, whereas measuring too early will often show results differently because the batch that you're reviewing still have open assignments that are potential recoveries. 4-tier rotation. Now, we have found that a 4-tier placement strategy is optimal. 2 pre-charge-off and 2 post-charge-off. Now, in regards to pre-charge-off, there's a couple of ways that you can go, such as 2 forwarding placements. But we have found that if you set 1 forwarding placement and 1 pre-charge-off skip placement, you'll have a better result that's generated. Monthly scorecards. Issue your scorecards monthly instead of quarterly. Scorecards foster competition, they provide feedback on performance, and coupled with a monthly call, they build relationships and assist with setting those expectations. If scorecards are distributed quarterly, it may be too long of a time frame to identify performance deficiencies. and it could leave with your vendors with little time to address operational or performance issues. Meaningful reward or penalty based on performance. Now, the best method of rewarding good performance is market share allocation. This is also the best method of penalizing performance deficiencies. However, it has to be sufficient and it has to be meaningful. If the reward or penalty is not meaningful, then there's not too much motivation for your vendors. When used properly, performance-based market share allocation will drive recovery results because the majority of your assignments are being handled by your better performing vendors. Thank you for taking the time to join me today in this discussion on optimizing repossession results through effective scorecarding.
Thank you, Ronald. Great job. Great job. If anybody has any questions, this is the time to ask them through the question submittal box. Just a few final comments. As Ronald emphasized, good scorecarding, good strategy, it can really make a difference. We've seen recovery results improve anywhere from 25 to 50% in some cases. Once a lender and institution implements both a scorecard and good performance management practices to match to it. But for those of you that aren't doing this now, but plan to head down that road, just a few pointers. First of all, be consistent. Whether you issue these on a monthly basis or quarterly basis or something else, do it consistently. We have some clients that they send these scorecards out when they get around to it, and it's just not nearly as effective. Some months we get them, some months we don't. Be transparent. Make sure that your vendors really understand exactly what you're measuring, how you're measuring it, because the better the understanding they have, the more impact it's going to have on your vendor strategy and how they resource your business. And then finally, be accurate. Which really does require discipline. We see mistakes in scorecards on a fairly regular basis, and we see bad decisions being made from bad data. So make sure you've got good reporting and measurement capabilities in place, because otherwise, bad data leads to bad decisions. Hopefully you've found all this to be informative and helpful today. We do plan to do these types of sessions, webinars on a regular basis, at least once a quarter, and each time we'll focus on something that is a very practical topic, very timely to the industry. Right now, our next one we're targeting for late January. The topic on that one's likely going to be all-in-one pricing for repossession services. This has become a pretty hot topic in the marketplace as of late. Some lenders have already moved to it. Others are taking a close look at it. It can offer some advantages, but it also can be very tricky. So we'll be reviewing all the issues surrounding that. Last but not least, your feedback on these sessions is really critical. We want them to get better and better each time we do it, and the only way that happens is if we get feedback from those that participate. So, in that regard, we're going to this afternoon. You'll receive an email from us that has the deck that we just reviewed attached to it. But it'll also have a link to a very brief, less than 1 minute survey. I ask that you please give us your feedback while it's still fresh in your mind, and we will absolutely take it seriously and incorporate it into our future efforts. Finally, per this last screen you're seeing on your monitor, do encourage all of you to if you're not already a member of the LinkedIn group, the Lenders Repossession Best Practices Forum, I encourage you to do so. This is a lenders-only forum that we sponsor that's designed to be an exchange for ideas, exchange of best practices, learn about what others are doing, pose questions and get feedback. We also publish a lot of content, and this the Best Practices Forum sees that content before anybody else does. We generally put it on the group page a good 2 weeks in advance of any other release. So if you're not already a member, and there are about 170 lenders who are, please join. And we'll also include a link to that in the email that we'll be sending you. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to hosting you at future events. Have a good afternoon.